Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you're with me. So glad you're listening. Thank you so much for all of your support and encouragement for this podcast. Sometimes I question whether I should continue, and then someone will say something to me and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep doing it. If it makes a difference, I'm going to keep going. So this episode today is another reason, because I love the guests we have on and I always learn something new, a nugget or two, or it gets me to reconnect with what I know and just reinvigorate me. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Sara Stover. She has written a book on heartbreak. It's called Handbook for the Heartbroken. Okay, we've all had heartbreak. There's not one single person that hasn't had a heartbreak where your heart felt like it was shattered into a million pieces. That's why it's important to do an episode, and she wrote a book on it, because heartbreak is universal and we feel so lost, alone, shame. We just feel like there's no hope. There's no hope for healing. And I'm here to tell you there is hope for healing, and it's temporary and it won't last forever, but we can't put a timeline on it. We talked about that throughout this episode. We talked about how do we start to heal from heartbreak? What's helpful to say to somebody? What isn't helpful to say to somebody? Where do we go to begin to heal? One way is I have a journal, which you know I love to share, and you can get it for free go on the website, kristendboyce.com/free resources. It's also linked in the show notes. That's a good place to start. But she also has so many helpful strategies, resources, meditations in her book. So let me introduce you to her. Sara Stover is the author of 3 books, teacher and mentor of women's spirituality, empowerment, and entrepreneurship, and a certified internal family systems practitioner. We talk a lot about IFS, internal family systems. We even do an exercise together, which I love. I've done it before and it's amazing. She lives in Boulder, Colorado, and she went to Columbia University, and then she had a bit where she had a cancer scare. She went overseas to Thailand. We didn't jump into that. We just talked about her most recent heartbreaks, and she's just been on a quest for healing. She's been featured in Yoga Journal, The Huffington Post, Newsweek, Natural Health, ABC, NBC, CBS. She's got a long credential history. She also wrote That Way of the Happy Woman and the book of She, S-H-E, all capitalized. But her latest one is the Handbook of the Heartbroken. I really enjoyed our conversation. So sit back. You might want to take your pen and paper to take notes. I invite you to do the exercise that she walks me through that I've done before. And you can listen to this episode again. You can put it on repeat. If you're really learning how to work with different parts of yourself, I invite you to earmark this episode. Keep it handy in case you need it. So for anybody that's gone through heartbreak, this episode's for you. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so happy you're here. I fell in love with this book title. Sara, I have to tell you, this book title is everything. Handbook for the Brokenhearted. Welcome to the podcast, first of all.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So tell me how you came up with the title of your book.
Well, this is my 3rd book, and so far the track record is that the titles kind of drop in like a download, and then sometime later the actual content of the book comes to me. So this title came to me a few months after the first heartbreak story that I share in the book. And so just to orient listeners, in this book I write about serial heartbreaks that I experienced between 2016 and 2020 that reached every area of my life, my relationships, my health and body, my social status, my career, finances, self-identity. And so that very first heartbreak was the domino that set all the other ones off. And it was the news of a betrayal by my former fiance. And a few months after that, I got the book title. And it wasn't until several years later that I actually felt like I had lived all the material and learned all the lessons needed to write the book.
Wow. It sounds like you've had many different forms of heartbreak.
Exactly. And that was another intention for the book, because I feel like all the conversations that I came across about heartbreak were about breakups and death, which are very real heartbreaks. Absolutely. And there are so many other forms that heartbreak can take. And some of the ones I just named, also things like health challenges, natural disasters, the state of the world right now, wars, the pandemic, aging parents, troubled teens. And I list over 20 different kinds of heartbreaks in the book to make it as inclusive as possible for anyone who's going through a challenging time or supporting someone that you know who's going through a challenging time.
Yeah, I think the word heartbreak, we use it, like you said, when we're going through grief, like a death, a divorce. We don't really talk about it with betrayals, health, like you said, these pieces like health issues that feel so deep and they almost dislodge your identity. You feel lost. You feel in the pit of grief and shame and fear. So what is your definition of heartbreak? Like, let's start there.
Heartbreak is a period of time in our lives that encompasses grief, encompasses anger, confusion, shock, depression, even suicidal ideation. It encompasses a whole range of things, and it comes from experiencing something in our lives that deeply impacts our hearts. And so again, this doesn't need to be a romantic relationship. I think we always just link the heart with romance, but we all know that there are so many things that can cause us anguish and that can cause us to feel like the rug has been pulled out from underneath us. So there's usually some sort of an event of the rug being pulled out from underneath us. And then we enter into this realm of heartbreak, which incorporates all these different things that I just spoke of.
Yeah. And I think like you saying a betrayal with your fiance, okay, that is so painful to walk through. And then do you think that affected your health issues? Like, do you think these are all linked together or do they feel
100%, 100%. And that's another thing I wanted to point out is the impact of these cascading losses that happen. So for example, someone gets a divorce and that's going to impact your friend circle because there are going to be people who side with your partner, people who side with you. It might impact where you live. You might need to move somewhere else. It might impact letting go of a pet or changing the custody arrangement with your children, your health, because your stress hormones are going to be really flooding your system for an extended period of time. And in women, it's been shown that that can increase things like autoimmune disease. In me, it led to a period of time where I had type 2 diabetes. It's very common. So there's a whole range of these cascading losses that happen after the event that make it even more challenging.
Yes. And I think that helps normalize like, oh, people think, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling the way I do? Why is my body betraying me? It feels like a losing everything. I mean, for a lot of people, it feels like heartbreak, so much of losing so many parts of themselves. How did you begin to cope with the heartbreaks, I should say, you were going through?
Gosh, there were so many different stages of it, but I think the biggest thing was really taking things one day at a time and breaking things down into smaller, more manageable moments. And a lot of it, there's the tactical things we need to do, like to get into kind of go mode to get things done. So in my case, after the betrayal, we ended up separating. And no, that doesn't need to be the outcome of betrayal, but that was in our situation. So it required a lot of logistical things like moving and dividing up our things and talking about what we're going to do with our pet. And so those logistical things. And then it's also meeting the feelings. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces and where I see so many people getting stuck because we're not taught how to feel in our culture. And we're taught that these more challenging emotions like grief, like anger, like psychic emotional pain, that they're bad and that we need to just rush through, get on with it, hurry up, get happy. But that's just a really misguided perception because actually the way to get everything that we want, which is to feel a sense of peace and wholeness and at homeness and whatever's happening, is to be with what's here. So it's just that meeting moment by moment the feelings. And if we don't have time in a particular stretch in the day, we need to show up and be with our kids or do our work, then we find pockets of time later on where we can go into it and feel and just metabolize what's needing our attention.
I think that is the key component. I really do. Just doing the work I do with clients, I feel like the more we feel, the more we heal. And yet you also have to, like you said, get things done. So people are afraid. Like I'm afraid I'll fall apart and I won't be able to take care of my kids or go to my job and function okay. So what do you say to someone that's like, I'm afraid I'm going to fall apart and I'm not going to be able to function if I open the emotions up?
Well, I talk about, what are you afraid would happen if you fall apart? I hear that you're afraid you're not going to function, but how do you know that that's what's going to happen? Are you actually able to function right now? And to start with these like little mini experiments, what if we just take 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, just go into your room, go into your bedroom or a quiet space, get into bed and just feel what's happening in your body. Drop the stories, just feel the sensations. Set a timer on your phone, do that and see how you are on the other side of that. And if that feels too scary to do by yourself, have a friend sit with you or let them know, text someone and say, I'm doing this right now. Can you call me in 15 minutes or 30 minutes to see how I'm doing? I would be willing to bet that you're going to feel better on the other side of that than if you were to stay in the avoidance, because the avoidance makes us feel worse.
I always tell people, I'll bet my house she'll feel better.
Yeah. So it's just like, yeah, just start with those little bits and then they need to just see it to believe it, feel it to believe it.
Yeah. These small windows, just stepping your foot in the water. It's like titrating. Okay, I can do a little bit and then see how that goes and a little bit more and a little bit more. What are some of the things that people have said to you that were helpful and some of the things that, because people don't know what to say to you when you're going through a heartbreak, that was helpful. So what wasn't helpful? What was helpful?
What wasn't helpful, I mean, there were a lot of things that weren't helpful, but one in particular was, I tell this story in my book, I was going on a hike with a newish friend. We were still kind of getting to know each other. And I woke up that morning and my heart was so heavy. Like I could hardly see straight. My heart felt so heavy. But I was just, I need to get out, connect with someone, move my body, get some fresh air. And we met on the trail and she started giving me advice about how to open my heart and how not to have such heavy energy. That made me feel even worse.
Yeah.
Being with someone who I already felt like it wasn't okay for me to be how I was. I was already just struggling just to make it through the day. And then someone else to reflect that back to me in a way where I just didn't feel accepted and seen and validated for how I was really challenging. So that, trying to change someone's state. And also sometimes when people would start telling me their stories and start to compare what I was going through with something that they went through, which actually they were not comparable. And it just felt like it, again, that was word validation. It felt like it invalidated what I was experiencing. And I know that they were probably uncomfortable and just trying to find a reference point between their experience and mine, but it just wasn't helpful.
Yeah, I find people do that. I've done that too, inadvertently. I don't mean to, but then you're like, well, me too. And we think that me too is helpful when it really takes the onus off the person. And now it shifts it to the receiver, the one that's supposed to be listening. It shifts the focus.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
there might be a time later on where we share our story, but I think initially in those really tender moments, it's more about just listening and being a presence of love with someone. And just saying things like, tell me more about what things are like for you right now.
My favorite, tell me more. That makes sense. You feel that way. It's okay to feel that way. That is, I think, one of the biggest things, if I could help change in the world, would be that for parenting, for friendship, for anybody that's walking through pain. It's easy for us to want to fix it or bypass it with a quote or a reference of something, or instead of just holding the space for someone's pain and having a tender, loving, compassionate place for them to come.
Yeah.
It's really, I think, a life-changing. Once you learn that and you can catch it in yourself, it's life-changing.
It is. And that's also one of the main messages of the book, to cultivate this environment within ourselves of self-acceptance. Even accepting, we talk about, I'm an IFS practitioner, even accepting the parts of us that are not okay with it and that are in resistance to it, accepting the full spectrum. And then helping to create environments, if we're not the one who's going through the heartbreak, of that acceptance, or if we are in the heartbreak, orienting towards those environments of acceptance, because that's what heals us.
Really is. And I love that you're bringing up, and I saw that you're an IFS practitioner. And for those that don't know what internal family systems is, I've talked about it throughout the podcast, but for those that might be listening for the first time, I'm like, what is IFS? Can you explain IFS and then how that was helpful in your healing journey?
Sure. Internal family systems is an evidence-based psychotherapeutic model that's also a way of living, which is one of the reasons why I love it. And it's also a spiritual practice because ultimately it helps us to live from our true self rather than from various aspects of our personality. And in IFS, those different aspects of our personality are called parts. And so we've all had the experience of, I just talked about that self-acceptance, like parts of us that don't want to be in heartbreak. When I had the betrayal, I had parts that didn't even want that to be my reality. I had parts that were angry. I had parts that were like, we need to get through this as quick as possible. I had parts that were devastated. So there's a multiplicity, there's a full spectrum happening inside of us that creates these systems of like family structures inside of us that often mirror our families of origin. And so IFS gives us a pathway to help to bring more harmony amongst those parts and more leadership with our true self. So that there's one analogy in IFS of like a orchestra, and the self is the conductor and the parts are like all the musicians in the orchestra. And so they all come together. The conductor of the self is leading the way so that you can create this beautiful music. That is the promise of IFS, to help us to live in that way. And I was grateful to have come across IFS right before the first heartbreak experience with one of my mentors. And afterwards, she and I were speaking. She said, you really need to be doing this pretty intensively right now, once a week for an extended period of time. Because what I saw was that even with all the spiritual practice I've been doing, all the therapy I've been doing for 20 years, and a teacher of these things, there were still some parts of me that were subconsciously running the show, especially in my intimate relationship, leading me to be in a relationship in the first place with a man who would lie to the extent that he was lying. And so I delved into IFS, and it helped me to reach those deep places that nothing else could. Because I tried a lot of things, and over time, it just has allowed me to feel this sense of wholeness in myself and acceptance in myself that I had never felt so consistently and to such a degree before. And I found it so life-changing that I went on to train in it and become certified, and now weave it into my work as well. And it's woven throughout the book as part of the path to healing from heartbreak.
Which I love that you integrated that into the handbook, because I look at your healing journey and I see how because you said the word acceptance. And I think that is a journey to get to acceptance. What are some of the things in IFS, internal family systems, that you did? Like, let's say someone's listening, they're like, I have no idea what she's saying. I don't know how to even apply this. Like, what would be something that would be helpful for someone listening going through heartbreak that they could apply and start implementing?
Well, the first thing is just to come into your body. So right now, you can just notice, like, even if you close your eyes or just have a soft gaze, you can just notice, where do you feel sensations in your body? And for instance, right now I'm feeling something in my chest. So I can just pause there and just get curious and see, like, okay, what do I notice about the sensation? And for me, it's like some warmth, a little bit of a pulsation. In IFS, we could say this is one of our parts, because our parts live in and on and around our bodies. So I could ask this, like, what do you want me to know right now? And you might get an answer that's in words or felt sense or an image. And I'm wondering, Kristen, as you tune into your body and notice something, what are you noticing?
I also felt it like kind of in my lungs, my chest. I could feel just like a little bit of a shortness of breath. And then I could feel fatigue, just a little tired. I could feel my body kind of feeling a little tired. But I love the question, kind of asking it, what's it need? And so,
what do you need, or what do you need me to know right now?
Yeah, to come back to the present moment, to really be present and attuned and connected to my body, to my feelings, to being here and now. That came really clearly, came through, to be present here.
And how is it for that part to know that you received that message from it, that you're acknowledging it?
Feels more relaxed, feels heard, feels like I'm coming more present as a result.
And just see if there's anything else that it's needing right now.
Feels pretty light.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing else is coming through. This is why I love IFS.
Yeah. So just thanking it for sharing. And so when you're ready, you can come back, Kristen. What you experienced and I experienced when I did it myself, and hopefully listeners' experience, was like we cast a line of connection. And so that was just with something simple that you notice happening in your body. So we can start with something that doesn't feel overwhelming or scary. And then you can see as you get more experience or you're working with someone who's skilled, you can start to go into the anger or the depression or the grief or the feeling of the heartbreak. And those are all held by parts, maybe not one part, maybe a cluster of parts, but you can start to draw that line of connection so that it just creates less of a feeling of isolation, because often our parts, like that part of you relaxed when that connection was made, when that contact was there, when it was heard. It's just like us as human beings or like children or animals. It's like we thrive with connection.
It's the essential ingredient, I feel like, that we're all trying to integrate, being reconnected to self, because we've gotten disconnected through trauma or a plethora of so many things. And that's the ultimate goal, is to reconnect. And so I love that's what it does. And I would invite listeners, if they're listening, you can replay Sara and her asking me these questions. I feel like I want to do this, and maybe, I need to listen to this multiple times to kind of really practice this, because I feel like it's a relearning of how to connect to your body and your emotions and your needs and your purpose.
Absolutely. Yes. In the book, there's several practices that I guide listeners through. And when you buy the actual physical copy of the book, there's free meditations that you can download from my website where I guide you through them. Or if you get the audiobook, I narrate you through them. So if you are going through a heartbreak and want like a series of different practices to support you, that's another option.
That's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. I think that's really helpful to people to feel like they have support or a guide. That's why I like you calling it a handbook, because people feel really lost in heartbreak. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to heal. They don't know how to get to the other side of it. One thing that I think stood out for me that you had mentioned is spiritual bypassing. And can you define that term? Because I think that can come up in people's heartbreak and how people are trying to be helpful, and it ends up being hurtful. So let's define what is spiritual bypassing, and then how can it play out in heartbreak?
Sure. Well, spiritual bypassing was a term that was coined by the late John Welwood, who was devout Buddhist practitioner and teacher and psychotherapist and author. And it's really using spirituality to override our humanity. So saying that you want to think positive or move towards the light or just only be in love, when part of our humanity is to feel pain and to have negative thoughts times, to feel anger. And when we bypass those things, particularly during a spell like heartbreak, which is meant to transform us, we're going to get stuck in the resentment or the anger. We're going to get stuck in the depression. We're going to get stuck in armoring our hearts and not being able to open again. But if we, like we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, if we feel it to heal it, if we go in and through, those very aspects of our humanity that are so hard to be with are the very engine of change that are going to carry us to the shores of our new life. It's not the positive thinking. It's not the love and light at all costs. It's going in and through exactly what's here.
It's the key. It is absolute key to getting through it to the other side. Talk to me about hope. People feel really hopeless and alone during heartbreak. What do you say to that?
Well, I wouldn't want to offer false hope. We don't know what's around the corner. But I remember when I was going through these heartbreaks, I was in a very hopeless place a lot of the time because they span for several years. And I would get to the end of the year and it'd be New Year's Eve and, setting intentions for the year. And I would think, okay, this is the year when things are going to turn around for me. This is the year I'm going to have my rebirth. And it wasn't. And then maybe something would happen that would take me even deep to a new rock bottom. So we don't know how long it's going to take. And one of the things I say in the book is it takes as long as it takes. But I saw a post from Glennon Doyle on Instagram at one point during those years, and it was a picture of two boats. And it said, you can't miss your boat. Like it's meant for you. It's not going to pass you by. And I took a screenshot of that and put it as my screensaver on my computer and just reminded myself of that. Like what is for me cannot pass me by. And when we feel that hopelessness, it's important to just remember the laws of nature, that after the night, there is the dawn, that after winter, there is the spring. That is how things are. That is the truth with a capital T. And so your new life will come. Your boat will come. We don't know when, but it will. And in the meantime, how can we show up and meet whatever we're experiencing and get the support that we need along the way to do that?
That's a beautiful metaphor. I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah.
As a reminder. I love that you got that reminder for yourself, and that's now helpful to other people to share. What do you think people don't talk about when it comes to heartbreak? What do you think isn't talked about? We hear a lot about heartbreak, and maybe not even that word. We use grief or other terms. What would you say needs to come more to the forefront when we're talking about heartbreak?
I think the shame, and shame by definition can only survive in secrecy. So I felt shame that I was cheated on. I felt shame that I had a pretty public fall from grace. I was very public with my relationship and my work and in my personal life. So there was shame associated with that. And there can be shame with certain kinds of heartbreak. And one of the stories I share is an abortion. There was a lot of shame around that. So the struggles, financial struggles, business, career struggles, a lot of shame can come with that. So I think having safe places to talk about our shame is important. And also what can be hard about it is how long it can take to heal. And our culture just is not oriented around giving people the space or the resources needed to heal. Very much hurry up and get on with it. And it can be kind of taboo to give into it, to surrender to it, to let it have a seat at the table of your life for as long as it needs to.
And I think heartbreak, not always, but just in my experience, I should say, from my experience, it has invited me to pause. Like what I normally could do, it's like, no, I didn't have it. I didn't have it to offer. I didn't have it to give. I didn't have it in me. It was like my energy could only, because you go into a survival state. It was almost like a forcing of a come back to myself, come back to the present moment, come back to pause, slow down. And that's hard when you feel like you got to keep doing and getting things done.
Completely. Yeah, there can be a real struggle with priorities. And maybe you're used to putting your kids as your priority or your work as your priority. And now you're needing to really put you as your priority. And so you still need to juggle those other things too. It's a lot, which is why also those cascading losses can happen, because it's like we're not meant to juggle all these things by ourselves. And one of the teachings that I share in the book comes from Malidoma and Sabanfu Somé, who are from Burkina Faso, and they brought grief rituals over to the US. And one of the things that they shared is that in a lot of West African cultures, people would have a full year to grieve, and they would be exempt from other responsibilities, and they'd be taken care of by the community, and they would have a space to grieve in community. And that is just the complete opposite of how we're set up. It's like we all we're crying on our bathroom floors and needing to juggle all of these pieces by ourselves.
That's so
not sustainable.
Oh, I remember when I lost my mom, it was like the grieving process, but I still had to work. To me, felt like dropping balls. I felt like I was apologizing. Like, I'm so sorry I didn't email you back, or I'm so sorry I didn't. And then I look back and I'm like, that was normal for what the grieving process, and that has helped me help others through the grieving process, that it's okay, that this is going to shift and invite you into deeper parts of yourself than you ever dreamed. I mean, That's what heartbreak does. And you're doing the deepest, it's another layer of deep expansion. Do you feel like that with heartbreak?
Absolutely. When we take the space to be with it, it really does expand our capacity. Like now I can be with people in a way that I never could before. And I have a level of empathy that wasn't available to me before. And I'm very grateful for that. And the people that are on the receiving end of it are really grateful too. So it's, that's another reason why I wrote this book, is so that living in these challenging times that we're in, it seems like they're just going to continue to be challenging in certain key ways, maybe even more so, who knows, so that more of us are equipped to really meet these times in a way that we need each other to do that.
Yes. That's why I like, because a lot of people I don't even know where to begin. When you're in heartbreak, you're almost like in a freeze state or shut down sometimes, or you just can't see straight. You're in a fog. You feel like you can't see through the next thing to do. And so this is why a handbook, and it's not telling you exactly what to do, but it's a guide. It's a resource, would you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not prescriptive because we can't. It's not a paint by numbers process, but it does share with you the landscape. These are all the things that you'll experience in the landscape of heartbreak, so that when you pass through that particular point, you'll have frame of reference, so you don't feel like you're just feeling your way through the dark.
Yes. And I think the internal family systems is the key component to navigating your way through it, because you're starting to acknowledge these parts of you that you knew were there, but you didn't have a way to frame it. It's a framework, so to speak. And then you're now accepting, nurturing, loving, inviting all those parts to the table instead of the shame kind of blocking those parts. And I think that is the most expansive work. I really do.
Also, the other thing that happens with heartbreak when we're adults is that all these unprocessed pains and grievances from our past that we didn't have the inner outer resources to meet come up to be healed. That was a lot of what I was working through during those several years. That and even ancestral layers, which IFS helps us with as well. But there's a lot of components, there's a lot of complexity, and IFS definitely helps us to meet all of those layers and to take that complexity and kind of simplify it through this framework that really does work.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that is so true. People are like, that's over now. Why am I getting so upset about something from their past? It could be a divorce, their parents' divorce, or a loss, or something happened in school when they were in school. I'm like, because there's a connection between your feelings now of loss and heartbreak, and you didn't get to process it then. It's unprocessed material that's begging now to be seen and basically let go of. Released. And sometimes we have to release it over and over and over.
There's a lot of, coming back to that word layers, it's like, I've often felt during those years that it was like an archaeological dig. It was like, okay, here's a layer. I just clear. Oh, here's another layer. Here's another layer. Like, wow, there's a lot of layers.
People are like, I thought I was supposed to be over this by now. I'm like, well, this thing, it's another layer that needs us to invite it in, be nurtured, process, notice the body. The body, as we know, through the body keeps the score, Dr. Basil van der Kolk, it holds on to it until we say, I see you. Okay, I feel that sensation. It's inviting me into, it's telling me something. I'm going to pay attention. So
Absolutely.
Heartbreak opens the door. And we say we want to walk through it. And sometimes we need a break, and that's okay too. We're just saying, I'm inviting you in so I can heal. I'm inviting all these parts in so I can get the healing and the freedom I want. What are the top 3 takeaways for heartbreak, would you say? If someone's listening and you're like, these are the top 3 key pieces to heartbreak that I want someone to take away from our conversation.
1, let it take as long as it takes. 2, you have to feel it to heal it. And 3, this too shall pass. Those sound simple, but there's a lot more within them. But I think those are 3 truths, universal truths that can apply to anyone's heartbreak.
I agree. Those are beautiful truths. Is there anything we didn't cover that you feel like was important to cover about heartbreak and healing from heartbreak?
I think also just really framing, I know that a lot of your listeners are on the healing journey and also a spiritual journey, because healing is a spiritual journey. Life is a spiritual journey. And just to bring in the concept of soul, how I really felt like these years that I wrote about in the book were an initiatory period for my soul. At the human level, it was very, very challenging, but I feel like my soul needed and wanted to go through those things so that I could cultivate certain soul qualities in a deeper way. Things like patience and perseverance and surrender and compassion. And for whatever reason, I needed those things in order to really, really get those qualities deeply embedded, deeply embodied in me. And so it can help when you're going through these challenging times to zoom out and to come out of our human experience, which can feel very small and we can feel very trapped and isolated. I often felt like I was backed into a corner and I didn't know how to get out of. And so remembering that bigger perspective that you're also a soul, you're also a spiritual being having a human experience. Your soul is evolving as a result of this. So are you as a human. And that we can also tune into that. So one of the things is like, that helped me a lot was just attuning to divine order. There is a higher order here. How can I just, we don't need to do anything other than holding that intention. I'm attuning to divine order. I'm inviting divine order into my mind, into my heart, into my body, into my day-to-day affairs, into my bank account, whatever, my relationship, whatever it is, that larger perspective is available to us too. And the more we can tap into that regularly, I think the easier we're going to find it to navigate, or the more we're going to feel held in like an orchestrated process of evolution.
Yes. How do you define soul for someone that's like, what does she mean by soul?
Soul is like the eternal part of us. In IFS, we could say that it's our self with a capital S. It's that which, if you've ever been with someone when they died or right after they've died, their body is there, but they're not there. So there's a mystery to it, but it's like this divine aspect of existence, like consciousness that is in our bodies, that kind of uses our bodies to move through life. And that when we take our last exhale, it leaves.
I like how you put that. I really do. Because I've been with people that have passed and you can feel it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like they're here, but they're not here.
Exactly. But you can feel their presence. It's an interesting, that's their soul, in my opinion, too. That transcends time, transcends the body. Is that how you would frame that? I mean, it transcends.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And therefore, sometimes it's hard to understand and comprehend because sometimes we want evidence and we want to know.
And just inherently, the soul is mysterious. And what happens after death is mysterious. But there is higher intelligence that's present in all things, including our heartbreak.
I agree. 100% agree. And I think that's an important addition that you're bringing up because it is, I see that as a key component to really expanding and finding inner peace.
Yeah, and I think it also, for me, it helped me to see more value in the heartbreak. And I think the more that we can see how something could help us and could improve things for us, the more we're going to be able to get on board with it. Like, for instance, like taking a vitamin, like if you know what that vitamin is going to do for you, if it's going to give you stronger hair and nails or whatever it is, like you're more likely to take it because you're like, oh, I want that thing. And so if we can see the benefits of heartbreak and how it's going to support us to become more of who we truly are, to feel more whole, to feel more connected, feel more alive, then we're more likely to say like, okay, I'm willing to devote something to really doing this and not avoiding it.
You see the pain as a catalyst for your healing.
Exactly.
And I find when you walk through the pain with clients or in my own life, then I'm able to access that gift of, oh, I see what this expanded in me. I see what I grew. And I see the next layer for me of really more empathy, like you said, more compassion and more love for myself and other people. I can sit in pain and not need to fix it. I'm just here to hold space and tolerate it. Even like the word tolerate, but I open to it maybe.
Yes.
It's deep. It's a deep dive. Heartbreak, when you get broken open. What was that Elizabeth Lesser book she wrote?
I think it was called Broken Open.
And I love the title too. I was like, yes.
Too.
Even though it's so painful, you're broken open to the leap of your soul. The soul, the essence of you that lives on. So thank you so much, Sara, for the work you're doing. Where can people find the Handbook for the Heartbroken?
It is at handbookfortheheartbroken.com. You can also find it wherever books are sold, but if you go to handbookfortheheartbroken.com, you'll see you can get some things to accompany your heartbreak journey, some gifts. Well, when you send in a receipt, things like a heartbreak playlist, a heartbreak resource list, and resource kit rather, and some other things. And from there, you can also find my podcast. It's IFS and women's spirituality called Herself. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Sara Avant Stover. You can just see the other things that I offer via handbookfortheheartbroken.com.
I love this so much. And for those that are listening, if you find Sara's voice soothing, which is very important for healing work. Get her downloads, get the book, listen to her podcast, because a voice affects your nervous system. A loving, compassionate, tender, warm voice really makes a difference in someone's healing journey. So that's why I'm like, listen to the podcast that you find helpful. And if you need to listen to it multiple times, do that. Do whatever feels good to your soothing, nurturing your soul. So thank you, Sara, for the work you're doing and being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.